Censorship originated in ancient Rome, and although the Romans were rid of it shortly after it was implemented, the concepts behind censorship expanded from property taxing to language output to uphold the moral code of conduct. Written language was much easier to censor due to most of the early publications being produced through a printing press. There was a limited amount of printing presses at this time, therefore it was easier to monitor the language in the written text produced. Spoken language, on the whole, is more difficult to censor because government/rulers do not have access to records of all spoken speech. The definition proposed by Allen and Burrage of censorship is dependent on the definition of common good. During the Tudor era, blasphemy was highly scrutinized and censored because using language such as turd was completely acceptable, whereas the definition of common good now, as society has changed, seems to have shifted. In the 21st century, nobody would bat an eyelid at someone saying, "Oh my God," but Princess Anne saying "naff off" caused an uproar. However, in the 21st century, we do have social media, news, YouTube, etc., which allows for broadcasting of spoken speech, which means that spoken speech can be scrutinized now in a way that it was not before. As previously mentioned, it was much easier to censor written language. During the Tudor era, there was a limited amount of printing presses, and therefore it was not difficult to monopolize all printing of written publications and pass it through the monarch. The language that was censored was not only blasphemy against God, but anything said against the monarch and the government. Despite the very final statement made by McHenry, censorship had not seen its end yet, but it did start being questioned. Poets and libertarians such as John Milton questioned the aspect of compulsion in censoring, as people who choose to avoid taboo language of their own volition arguably are more moral than those who are forced. The public also formed rebellious groups such as the Ranters, who embraced taboo language as a form of protest. However, acts such as the 1650 Blasphemy Act continued to be passed. In the 18th century, as the middle class began to grow in Britain, they wanted to further themselves from the working class as much as possible. One way to do this was through their language choices. A process of language refinement began taking place, where words which were not necessarily taboo were replaced with words that were deemed even more proper. The biggest challenge for censoring in the 20th century was the surge in technology. Most of the general public had access to a television. Programs which contained taboo language were being broadcast straight into people's homes. Performances and plays such as Pygmalion also began to incorporate taboo language. One program which was on air during the 60s was called Till Death Us Do Part. There was a character on this program called Alf Garnett who used an excessive amount of taboo language. He used blasphemous language, homophobic language, racist language, and general swear words. So yes, taboo language was broadcast more on the television, but it was used in an exemplary manner. Garnett was used to showcase the things that were wrong with the society at the time. However, despite this intent, it helped to normalize the usage of taboo language, as the language was explicitly broadcast. Taboo language became more accepted as society moved away from religious absolutism. Laws and acts were passed in the late 60s which helped this movement. However, some taboo words are still frowned upon today, such as the N-word, due to the severity of their offence.